here to spend time with Vice President Mike Pence. Isn't that exciting? And everyone here will be graded, even if you're a professor, a board member, so you must participate. This is exciting to have him here. A few weeks ago, I said I wanted to do this, and my students said yes. There wasn't one who said they didn't want him to come, and some said you can't do it this quickly, so I'm so grateful that you squeezed us in on your California trip. Nearly 3 years ago, I arrived at Pepperdine. Perhaps there was some skepticism about having a former Trump alum join the faculty, or a Trump alum join the faculty. But the university took a chance. That was easy compared to what followed. I told them I was going to create a course titled How to Run the World and feature a national or international thought leader every week. I think there was some eye rolling among the administrators, but they said, go ahead and let's see what you do. Since then, we've had Condoleezza Rice, Jim Mattis, Peter Thiel, Winsome Sears, Paul Wolfowitz, Joe Lonsdale, among many others in my course, virtually or in person. Others, including Newt Gingrich and Liz Truss, have been in this very room or in other parts of campus for conferences that my colleagues and I have held. And along the way, the Taube philanthropies, especially Tad and Diane Taube, joined President Jim Gash in endowing the largest faculty chair in the university's history. I'm the first recipient. Hopefully I live long enough to keep it going. So if that's not enough, now we have Vice President Mike Pence with us. It's an honor to have you join us at Pepperdine on this particularly blessed day that God has made. I thank the audience as well. Before I discuss his background, the Vice President's, let me thank those who made this event possible today. And I didn't write everyone's name down, so I'm going to forget a few people. But I start with Chancellor Sarah Jackson, who's been my partner in all of this, and Vice President Lauren Cosentino as well, who's been my partner in all of this. Dean Pete Peterson, who wonders what the hell I'm doing most of the time. Jim Gash, the president, and Jay Brewster, the provost. I think I got it. But there are others as well. There's Patrick and Cheryl and Jillian and Annie and Avery and Kathy and many others who worked so hard to put all of this together in a very short period of time. If I'm missing someone, I'm very sorry. I may jump on stage at the end and add your name in, but it's been a joy to work with you. Let me say a bit about the Vice President. I won't take too long, but he was born in Columbus, Indiana, to a quintessentially American family. His father and mother demonstrated the best of America, emphasizing the core values of service, hard work, and family. Vice President Pence is known as a man of deep faith, a characteristic that seems important in his background and comes from his background. It also, many believe, comes from his time at Andover College, where he earned a bachelor's degree in history. Following that life-changing experience, Vice President Pence decided to attend Indiana University School of Law, where another life-changing event happened, meeting his wife, now known as Second Lady Kiron Pence. As a result of that union, they had 3 children, Michael, Charlotte, Audrey, and as we learned this morning, there are about 4 grandchildren, 4, and more on the way, maybe. Vice President Pence has a deep love and reverence for his home state, and he knew he wanted to give back. So in 2000, he successfully ran for a congressional seat, and I'm told visited Pepperdine with a group of congressmen. So he earned a place in the U.S. House of Representatives. He was a powerful leader and public speaker and quickly made an impression on his colleagues, earning the role of chairman of the House Republican Study Committee and House Republican Conference. He became chairman of it as well. Even though he was making a difference in Washington, he felt a call to return to Indiana, running a successful campaign to be the governor, the 50th governor of the state. During his time leading the State House, he created an economy with most Hoosiers working in the state in history. That's what they're called. Expanding school choice and record tax cuts. Then something else happened. He became the vice presidential or the running mate for Donald J. Trump in 2016. As we all know, that was a successful campaign, and Mr. Pence was confirmed as in the nation's second highest office. Vice President Pence served in the office with distinction, with honor and integrity, and as many would say, most importantly, with faith. Thank you for your commitment and service to our nation. Mr. Pence, it is an honor to have you here today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kiron. How about a big round of applause for Dr. Skinner? She read that introduction just the way I wrote it, and no, it was overly generous. And as I said at the Chancellor's house just a little bit ago, when Dr. Skinner called, my admiration and respect for you is such that I didn't think attending was optional. Which probably accounts for the extraordinary company that I'm joining today now as a part of this series. And so, Dr. Skinner, I want to thank you so very much. I want to thank President Gash, and a special thanks to, and a round of applause for Chancellor Sarah Jackson again, for your hospitality, your vision for this series. To the dean and wonderful faculty that's here, but mostly these students who I'm told are going to put me through my paces in just a few minutes. I'm ready, willing, and able. I want to tell all of you, students particularly here, that I hope you understand, and not just because of the weather and the view, what a truly unique place Pepperdine University is. I first heard of it when I started my career on Capitol Hill. I came out here to see it for myself. My hero in politics, the reason I became a Republican, was a governor of California who identified this wonderful Christian school and said, let's work with patrons around the state and move it to this special place. But I want to tell you, it's not the geography. It is the character and the commitment to faith and freedom and principles that makes Pepperdine University stand out in America. But I also want to tell you, it's those of you that have lived through the tumultuous days here in California, the wildfires, have been very much on our hearts. And the families that have been impacted, I expect some in this room have been directly impacted that. Although the campus was spared, the people of California were not. And I just want you to know there's been a chorus of prayers around the country. And I know California will rebuild, but the losses have just been breathtaking to even observe. All of that being said, it's a little intimidating to get a call to speak at a class about how to run the world. But it's a topic those of us that have served in Washington always feel prepared to speak to. And I'm delighted to be here. If I can, how about another round of applause for the Taube family? Diane, thank you for believing in this vision. Bringing together people among who have had the opportunity to serve in leadership, among men and women who are unquestionably going to be leading the state, communities, families, businesses, and the nation is a real privilege, and it's evident of that vision. But I want to speak just a moment, Dr. Skinner's urging about what I think is the character of leadership. And then I'm going to sit down and I used to have a radio show back in the 1990s. I know it's hard to believe. I don't seem that interesting. It was kind of Rush Limbaugh on decaf. But I was on 18 radio stations around the state of Indiana, 6 days a week. I was 3 hours a day. My wife would occasionally listen to the show. And I'd come home after the 3-hour broadcast and I'd say, "What'd you think of the show?" And she almost invariably, because the show started like most talk shows do, with a monologue, a long monologue of some kind. And then you'd take calls from people around the state of Indiana. And Karen would always, I'd say, "What'd you think of the show?" And she said, "Well, it got really good after you started taking calls." So I'm a little bit better at dialogue than monologue, but let me share a couple of foundational thoughts, if I can, for these young people about leadership. For me, there's a bit of a misnomer going around in this generation. And I have 3 kids. They're all married now. All of them are in some form of public service. 2 families in the military. But there's a bit of a misnomer among the rising generation that adversity creates character. The way you all put it in this generation is, whatever doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Well, I have a very different view. I think that whatever doesn't kill you just didn't kill you. And here's the thing I would offer to you. I believe that adversity doesn't create character. Adversity reveals character. And whether you leave from here and you put on the uniform of the United States and step into harm's way, whether you find yourself leading an enterprise with decisions that bear upon the livelihoods of hundreds or thousands of people, or whether you find yourself in elected or appointed office, the challenges will come. You'll face adversity, particularly if you're standing on the principles for which Pepperdine University was created. And I would submit to you that the outcome of that moment will be determined by every quiet moment that passed before. And what I want to challenge each one of you today with is that I believe that leadership and character are developed over time. And this time in your life, you ought to be developing the habits of heart and mind in faith and relationships that will sustain and strengthen a character that will rise to that moment, when that moment comes, large or small. Now, for me, ultimately, that comes from faith. Now, you can read my autobiography, which is entitled "So Help Me God," based upon the oath of office that I took many times over. And you'll find out that I grew up in a wonderful church family. It was church on Sunday morning. It was grace before dinner. But frankly, by the time I got to high school, I lost interest in religion. I'd had a fair amount of social success, president of my class, dated the captain of the cheerleaders, which was more impressive than being president of my class. But I thought religion was a crutch some people needed. I wasn't putting it down. I thought it's fine if you need that. I just figured I didn't need it. But by the time I went off to college, at that little college in southern Indiana, which is so similar to this one. I mean, it overlooks the Ohio River. I knew something was missing in my heart and my mind. And I started to meet people as a freshman in college who didn't talk to me about their denomination or about their religion. They were just young men and women that told me they were Christians. And they began to speak to me about having a personal relationship with God. Well, that was foreign to me. I thought of religion in a larger sense of being a part of something larger. I never thought of it personal to me. And then along the way, over the course of that year, I began to sit down and spend time with someone who I just heard from a text today. He just retired from a career in full-time ministry, but he was a senior at the fraternity I joined. A guy by the name of John Gable. And I started those late night conversations you have sometime in college, sitting around talking about God, right? And John finally got frustrated with me. He said, you know what? He said, I'm not going to have another conversation with you about God late into the night at the fraternity. He said, until you do one thing for me. He said, I want you to read the book of Mark cover to cover in one sitting. And then I'll talk to you about the guy in that book. So I took up the challenge. And I sat down one day and I read the Gospel of Mark cover to cover. If you've never done it, just encourage you to do it. Because the person I encountered there was different than whatever stereotypes I had created in my mind over a lifetime of growing up around religion. And it was in that time that we began to go deeper in conversations, and I decided I was going to be Christian. That's how I said it. I said to John, because I'd been going to this fellowship group, and I said, I'm going to go ahead and be Christian, and John was wearing this cross around his neck that I thought was very appropriate, not too big, not too small. And I told him, I want to get a cross like you got because, I'm going to be Christian now. And he said he got it from a catalog. Now, that you'd have to make a phone call to call what's in the catalog. I'll explain that to you later. This was before you could order everything on earth on your phone, okay? So I started bothering him about where he didn't give me the catalog. One day we were in the kitchen at the fraternity, and I said, John, don't forget to give me that catalog. I'm going to order that cross. And he said words to me that I'd never gotten over. It's almost been 50 years. And he says he doesn't remember saying it. I said, hey, don't forget to give me that catalog. And he said to me, well, Mike, remember you got to wear it in your heart before you wear it around your neck. And he walked up the stairs. And in that moment, I felt like a mask had just been pulled down. I mean, John knew. He's a good guy. He was a friend of mine, but he knew I was phony. I was faking it. I was just in my latest pose. And he called me out on it. And it would be a few weeks later that I went at his invitation to a little place called Asbury University in Kentucky that was much in the news not long ago. And it was a Christian music festival in the early days of contemporary Christian music. It was there on a rainy Saturday night, sitting on a hillside, hearing preaching and singing, that it was an invitation. And I remember I stood up and I walked down. Not because I'd become intellectually convinced that what I read was true, but because my heart was broken by what had been done for me on the cross. And I walked down and I accepted Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior, and my life has never been the same. It's true. But I remember my first thought, and this is where I'm not going to go on a lot longer here because I'd love to know what's on their minds. My first thought was, when I gave my life to Christ, I said, well, this lifelong ambition of being in public service that had been literally, it animated a lot of my youth. I have a little memory box of when before I was 10 years old, saving articles about President John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. And I was enamored of it, but I realized, I thought, well, now I got to choose between living out my Christian faith or going into politics. I really did. And if you draw nothing else from today, the young people that are here, I want you to hear me say, you don't have to make that choice. Now, there will be choices along the way that you do have to make if you want to live a life of integrity to both the conduct to which we are called as believers and the principles of life and liberty, but you don't have to choose between both ways. In fact, I would argue as a student of American history that this nation has ever depended on men and women of character and faith and integrity to step into the public square and live out their values and their principles. And it does again today. So I'm looking forward to a great conversation about how to run the world. And I expect there's a lot of people in this room that have great ideas about that. But I hope more than anything else that that you come to your own sense of calling, and I expect it's why you're taking a class like this, your own sense of calling with a deep conviction that not only do you have to choose between living out your faith and your values and politics, but rather, more than anything else, if you will commit to a life of integrity, I don't know if you'll run the world, but you can change the world. I believe it with all my heart. And just remember what our founders also knew, that ancient verse, that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's freedom. And that means when we make freedom our cause, we make His work on this earth our own. And it also means freedom always wins. Thank you very much. God bless you. It's an honor to be with you today. It really is.
Okay. Well, Mr. Vice President, thank you for joining us here today. My name is Christopher Carroll. I myself was born and raised in Speedway, Indiana. So.
Come on, I was married in Speedway, Indiana.
Oh, sir. What church?
Huh? It was a St. Christopher's Catholic Church.
Oh, it's my family's church. Actually.
Is that right?
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, what a coincidence.
No, it wasn't a coincidence at all, because Kiron and I, we are dyed-in-the-wool Indianapolis 500-mile race fans.
Of course.
And so we said we're getting married in Speedway. So
like
that's,
that.
that's actually how that worked. Great community.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us here today. It's always good to have the company of a fellow Hoosier so far away from home.
That's
But,
right.
I have a question regarding a chapter in your book called Go to the Chute, where you speak on Hoosier values and principles, and you remarked on how Hoosiers tend to believe in their fellow man when others don't. And my question to you, sir, is what sort of Hoosier values did you carry with you in your time of public service?
Well, I hope I hope that the upbringing that I had in Indiana, where Hoosier hospitality, as you know, is not a slogan. I mean, when people visit from, not just from California, but when people visit from other places in the country, it's a little unnerving when they're downtown in Indianapolis a lot, because people say hello on the sidewalk. In big cities and small towns, people will, hi, nice to see you. And that freaks some people out. But Hoosiers are very friendly, very hospitable, and very respectful of one another. I think it's a classic Midwestern temperament. But you mentioned thank you for looking at my book. That's the other book. I wrote that book with my daughter, Charlotte, who writes for the Daily Wire and has done 3 children's books, 1 book about our family, and then I wrote a book with her entitled Go Home for Dinner. But that chapter is really very meaningful to me because it's entitled Go to the Chute, and it basically says if you have an opportunity to have an experience, step up, seize it. And it's very timely this week because Gene Hackman just passed away. Gene Hackman played the coach in what I think we all can agree was the greatest sports movie of all time, Hoosiers, right? But he played Coach Norman Dale, right? And the reason why it's in the book is because Karen and I were just married in Speedway, about 6 months, and then on the local radio station they said, they're filming a movie at the field house at Butler University. And if you wear 1950s style clothing, you can be an extra in the movie. And Karen and I said, what kind of movie are they going to shoot at Butler University's campus that we'd ever want to be a part of? Only my favorite movie of all time. So that was one of our enduring lessons. When you have an opportunity, go to the Chute. But I think, honestly, that movie, Hoosiers, I've been in a whole lot of barbershops over the years in various roles in Indiana, from Speedway to Milan, Indiana, where the real Hoosiers team came from. And it's just exactly like it is in the movie. People with strong hearts and strong opinions, and I hope I carried that into my career.
Thank you, sir.
All right, my name is Tori.
Hi, Tori.
Nice to meet you, and thank you so much for being here. At the very end of your book, Go Home for Dinner, your daughter writes about the importance of practicing forgiveness when it is incredibly hard and always continuing to forgive, and how your wife reminded her of that. And I was just wondering, have you found that this has gotten harder or easier as you've kind of moved through public service and aged? And have you found that this has gotten easier to work on?
Well, if my wife was here, she could confirm I'm very much a work in progress as a Christian. I consider myself a growing Christian. I'm not grown. Although that decision I just described was 1978. But so for me, it's about working out your salvation with fear and trembling, like the Bible says. And one of the ways that I tried to do that was in this category. Shortly after I was elected to Congress, I thought, one of the things that I could do is have a prayer journal. I don't know if any of the rest of you ever done that. Literally a journal where you write down prayer requests and things, because when you're in a public role, a lot of times people, if they know you're a Christian, they'll ask you to pray for something. And so I kept a journal, and then I thought, well, wait a minute, I should actually have a page of the journal, for all the areas that I'm called to pray for. Pray for those leaders and those in authority, pray for your family, look after those of your own household, pray for those that are infirm or sick. And it also says Jesus taught us to pray for our enemies. That's a pretty full section of my prayer journal to this day. It's actually a 4-volume set. But I'm going to tell you something, now that you laughed at that, and it was meant to be funny. If someone has wronged you, and that's going to happen, I don't care if you're in business, if you have a distinguished military career, or if you're in an elected or appointed office, there are going to be people that mistreat you. And I have found a long time ago that if you literally pray for people who have woefully treated you, forgiveness just grows in your heart. And I haven't repaired every relationship that I've ever run afoul of, but I've repaired a lot of them. And people can sense when you've moved beyond. So I think literally when Jesus said, pray for your enemies, pray for those who speak woefully against you. And there's a freedom that comes in that. So put it into practice, you won't be disappointed. Sir.
Yes, Mr. Vice President, we just appreciate your time here in Malibu, and I like that we're matching. I think we look great together. So, just wanted to ask, in your work, So Help Me God, you engage with biblical teachings throughout. At one point, you point toward the Gospel Mark 9:35, which reads, "Anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all." I think many Christians and young people in the room are drawn to public service, but yet are met with these idealistic visions of making a difference in the harsh realities of what our political climate looks like. So I'm just wondering if you could explain a little more what the costs of living out your faith look like in a high-stakes political environment, and how you reconcile that with your individual calling.
Well, it's a wonderful question. I appreciate it, and I'm humbled by the implication of the question. But I really, if the other thing I would say, the one thing I want you to come away with, maybe there's one other, go to school on servant leadership. Okay? It was actually a Hoosier by the name of Robert Greenleaf that wrote a famous book decades ago entitled Servant Leadership. And it is in a very real sense putting, it says that Jesus came not to be served, but to serve, right? Took the very nature of a servant. Because I think more than anything else, what I've tried to live out in my 20 years in public office was to apply the principles of servant leadership, which are many and diverse, but it all proceeds from see if you can lift other people up, give other people opportunities. And it's almost counterintuitive to think that as you do that, what I've witnessed in my own life and in lives of people that I greatly admire is opportunities open for you that you didn't expect when you actually are working hard to be a servant of the people around you. And in fact, there's a terrific book. It's not a Christian book, but it's one that those of you that have an interest in being in business, and some of the senior faculty here would know. It's entitled Good to Great by Jim Collins. It's a classic. But what's fascinating about that book is it studied about a half a dozen companies that didn't grow like this. They grew like this. And it's a study, if you will, Chancellor, of the kind of leaders, the kind of CEOs and presidents of those companies. And not, to me, it's just, the older I get, the truer the Bible gets. I mean, what you find is that, and Jim Collins never really calls it this, but every one of these companies that went through transformational growth were led not by people that were the larger-than-life leaders that we always associate with business success, but they were men and women who had a servant attitude, lifted other people up, empowered other people, affirmed other people. And frankly, I won't embarrass them, but we got some distinguished military veterans in the room. The most impressive people that I've met in the United States military reflect that same attitude. They're constantly building other people up around them, and then they move forward. So to me, that's the biggest principle, is servant leadership. So take a look at Robert Greenleaf's book, and even that book, Good to Great. It'll surprise you to be, and I think that kind of leadership, more than anything else, is what a lot of people are looking for today, in and out of public life.
Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Vice President. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
My name is Faith. In chapter 3 of your book, Go Home for Dinner, you kind of touch on the difficulties of accepting one's purpose and then pursuing it and attempting to fulfill it. But what advice can you give for those of us who are students here, especially in such a big stage of life in which that we're faced with that tension? What advice can you give for discerning your purpose, accepting it, and pursuing it, but also balancing it with the other areas of life?
Well, number one, thanks for reading the book. My daughter is a way better writer than her dad, so it's actually way better than the first book. She's amazing. You'd really like her. She's a little bit older than you, but not much. I think when I was your age, I felt a great weight in my life that I had something to do in the world. And what it did is it drove me, after I left college, even though I'd made a decision for Jesus Christ when I was in college, I ended up going to law school a few years later, and again, I started to fix on what I thought I needed to go out and do in the world. And as you read in the longer book, and maybe in a little bit in the short one, that led me into a couple of campaigns where I didn't live out what I profess to believe about do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. And I got caught up in a couple of these very highly negative campaigns, and I not only lost 2 elections for Congress in a row, after it was all over, I lost a lot of self-respect. And I thought my political career was completely over, that I was finished, done, over. And that was that time in my life that I came across that verse I write about in the book. Kiron and I had trouble getting our family started, but when the children started to come along, I read Genesis 18:19. You ought to write it down. I mean, it's a fascinating verse. Genesis 18:19. I heard a pastor preach on it. And it's this moment where God is talking to himself about Abraham. And he says, whether he's going to tell him about something he's going to do. And he says, well, of course I'll tell him, for I've chosen him. Now, I love to stop there because you can go, well, what did he choose Abraham to do? Well, leave the Ur of the Chaldeans, go to the Promised Land, found the great religion, have, credited with righteousness. No, it's not what he says. He says, for I've chosen him to see to the members of his own household that they would do what is right and just, so that the Lord would fulfill his purpose for him. to see to the members of his own, I've chosen him to see to the members of his own household to do what is right and just, so that the Lord would fulfill his purpose for him. And I got to tell you, as I wrote in that little book, that was an incredibly freeing moment for me, because I had this weight, and maybe some of you feel it, maybe not, you're better people than me. I had this weight of what I had to do in the world. And that's okay. There's actually nothing wrong with that. There's a sense of calling. But when I came across that verse, for me it said, you want to know my purpose for you? It's Karen and Michael and Charlotte and Audrey. You see to them, I'm going to fulfill my purpose for you. And I let go of that, of what I thought was the ambition that I had to go find and fulfill, and focused on home. And then my life surprised me. I mean, really and truly. I remember when we got the call in 2016 from the Trump campaign asking if I'd be willing to be considered to be his running mate. My daughter Charlotte said, Dad, we all saw this coming. I said, I didn't. I endorsed Ted Cruz in that primary. Could have it, which the president never failed to remind me of for 4 years. A good friendship for those 4 years. Didn't end the way I wanted it to, but proud of the record. But I honestly think that to me is the key, is if you make God's priorities your priorities, he's going to put you where he needs you. And there are leaders in this room. There are men and women who are going to be of enormous consequence in the life of your communities, your state, and this nation. And I just think it all begins with, for me at least, making God's priorities my priorities, and being freed up from that, and then being open to where he leads.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.